Hey, and welcome back to Anthro-Lore, an archive and catalog of myth, legends, and folklore. It's me, Buck, again, and I'm joined today with...
I'm Nolani, sitting to Buck's left.
Yes, this is important.
And I'm Alex.
On my right, we have to get the cardinal directions.
It doesn't matter.
Yes, it does. We've been recording for a while. Today is continuing on that train of the undead. I think this is our last one of the month, unless we do find a story we want to do for a radio play. But we're doing zombies. We might get more in depth with this, but we're just gonna start it off with, what are they? And really that depends on who you ask, because zombie is a pretty broad term.
Yeah, like some people consider them the undead, but if you think about them in the terms of Haitian voodoo, they were actually just people who you thought were dead really weren't. Their just heartbeat was really low, so you couldn't detect it.
And they're kind of
They
like...
were poisoned, and now we're servants.
I'd say slaves.
Slaves.
But then, I mean, from going away from Haitian voodoo, everybody's got a different zombie. I mean, when we were talking about vampires, that was basically a zombie, what you were talking about, right?
Yeah, the ginseng.
Yeah, and then even away from there, everybody's sort of got a different definition of what is a zombie. And I feel like pop culture is one of those big driving factors in what divides us on what is and isn't a zombie. Because, like, I don't know, even in pop culture, there's a divide. There's viruses, there's bacterial infections, there's magic, there's just parasites, fungus infections. Also, I mean, cordyceps is a real thing that turns things into zombies, basically. It's not fake. Cordyceps virus it's a mushroom, right? The cordyceps? I think it's a mushroom that like infects ants and causes them to do odd behavior. It basically mind controls them before erupting out of their exoskeleton and killing them, where they can get eaten by rabbits and continue the life cycle. But everything, there's no real static thing to a zombie except for the fact that they're dead and they eat people. Sometimes.
Usually they tend to have really low IQ as well.
I think I don't know though. I feel like in some stories that varies. I mean, at least in Resident Evil, there's a hierarchy of zombie. You know, like there's the zombie, then there's, I don't know, there's like 5 different viruses now with Resident Evil 7. There's the T, G, C, the Las Plagas, that one from Resident Evil 5, but nobody liked that game. What even happened in Resident Evil 6? That was the bad one. And then there was Resident Evil 7 with the mushrooms.
What was like the little girl?
The mycelium thing, sort of. She was like a fungus thing?
No, she was just infected with something and she just kept throwing up and like
It was
goop
bugs.
monsters that came out and like she could infect people and they turned into like these creatures.
I guess they aren't really
This
zombies.
is why people
then.
hate children.
Well, she wasn't actually a child. She was actually like 70.
Yeah, she rapidly aged and so like
She had like a cognitive effect on the person where you would perceive her as a child, and that was how the infection would spread because it's a small child. And all she wanted was a family.
well, that's what happens when you change them into like crazy murdering machines. Like
It's also like just what the South be like sometimes. But I mean, there's the divide of fast zombies versus slow zombies. The classic Dawn of the Dead zombie. The more necromantic zombie.
I like to usually think like with zombies that when like the first outbreak happens, like they're all like feral, like
Just people.
yeah, and like they kind of just have a hunger and they're trying to satisfy that and they just keep on eating and everything like that. And then like as you would say apocalypse or something, whatever is continuing, they become like more well versed or something like
Or
that.
docile.
Yeah. and like different things where how you're saying I'm not familiar with Resident Evil, but some of the zombies that I've seen in that are crazy.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair though, those are the results of like purposeful genetic experiments to make variations instead of a natural evolution.
Mhm.
Usually it's to make someone stronger.
Yeah. It's
Like,
not to make it's not originally to make a zombie. They're like,
No.
what if we made a superhuman? Oh, we made zombies again.
Dang it. Let's try again.
Oh, let's use a parasite. Ah, dang it, we made zombies again. Let's use a different parasite. Dang it, it's zombies.
Let's use a little girl.
Uh,
Dang it.
Is it zombies?
It's more like goop monsters.
Well, I feel like the family itself is
Zombies, because I mean, like,
I mean, that one old guy, you kind of blow his head off, and he keeps talking to you.
yeah, but he, like, regenerates. I mean,
I hated seeing that. That game was actually terrifying compared to all of the other Resident Evil
well,
games.
yeah, they were bringing horror back. I mean, Resident Evil kind of got action.
Kind of.
It was an action genre when it was supposed to be a horror, and then they brought it back to the horror.
Yeah, to the back to the survival horror aspect.
Which is always fun.
I think that's a thing that's always in a human's mind is that, I mean, it sounds awful, but everybody at some point was like, I wonder what a zombie apocalypse would be like.
Yeah, I think that kind of has to do with like, kind of like survival. Like,
It's
if there was nothing else in the world that I could live off of, like now, like, can I be like that basic human? Like,
can we go
thriving.
back to that? And like that's the thing with every apocalypse story, right?
Mhm.
It's like the nuclear apocalypse, it's rebuilding of society.
Yeah.
The zombie apocalypse, rebuilding of society with the other. Basically, that is the ultimate aspect of this us versus them. They're
Yeah.
the other, completely dehumanized and like that. And every apocalypse is like that, but everyone's like, oh, I could do it, even though we don't know how to sew or farm or tend to
Yeah.
wounds or do anything that's basic humans used to be able
Which
to do.
is upsetting because not just that, like, but with every apocalypse, when they try to rebuild the world, they do everything wrong again.
Yeah, they do all. It's like, what if we just remade it exactly the way it was before we caused this? It's like, no?
I mean, sometimes they're looking for something better, but then it just ends up going back to how everything was before the zombie apocalypse. And I think it's supposed to show, like, can we actually change? Can we move forward? Or are we always stuck in, like, this permanent state of never learning from our mistakes, never learning from our history?
We were the real zombies all along.
Exactly.
And I think another important factor, especially with zombie stories when they made that resurgence back in the early 2000s, I think, was that sort of the whole vibe of the earth was sort of like, we're in an economic crisis. What's worse than that? Oh, zombies. And that I can't cite my sources on this, but there was a book I read that was basically explaining zombie stories become popular in times of economic instability because it's that idea of something else is consuming everything, and that's the real threat.
Yeah.
Like, that's when The Walking Dead came out, and that's when they still had zombies in that show.
Do you think that, like, where was I going with this? That zombies can still be considered undead, even though, like, sometimes people would make the argument that children nowadays are basically zombies, like, just going...
I feel like that's just baby boomers not understanding the flow of time. I'm sorry. The entirety of the human information is on the internet. I know how to access it. Oops.
You know what makes me angry is that all of the people that are older than me, like, you know, the people that are supposed to be teaching you are like, when you learn, you've got to read things, you've got to read the directions, like, look everywhere. And they can't even use a freaking computer. And I'm like, read. It gives you directions. Enter is to click, and like, is enter to go back, hit the back button, like, interpret your surroundings, and like, they can't seem to do that. Anyways, that's not zombies, but
They're basically zombies.
Oh, burn. Jeez.
Sick of burn on old people. I'm not resetting the router anymore, Dad. Anyway, so how do you guys feel about the divide between fast and slow zombies?
Personally, I prefer the slow zombies because then
It's more reasonable.
it's more reasonable and I feel like I can get away. It
I
goes back to like that whole survival thing, right?
I like the aspect of slow zombies more because it's not fast zombies. First off, that's
I
terrifying.
think they're fast when like they first die because it's still kind of like you still have not like that human ability, but you still kind of have like that full function of your body, almost like
And
kind of like a body like twitches after it dies or something like that.
the muscles haven't started to deteriorate.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's kind of like in the Last of Us. We know when you first get the first zombies and they haven't turned into like clickers or bloaters or anything, and they come at you fast. Like you have to like shoot them, but they're easier to take down. Whereas like clickers, they move slow and they can't really see you, but they can hear you, and like you have to take them out with like a gun. You can't take them out with a knife like you could the other ones.
Yeah.
See, the reason I think slow zombies are sort of a better story element for a zombie story is because it's that looming threat. They're always on the horizon, and you can't stop them. The thing with fast zombies is they're here and it's over in an instant. They swarm you. It's fast. It's like a tidal wave. But with slow zombies, sure, you can run away, but they're still going to be behind you. They're still coming.
Yeah.
It gives you time to prepare, but can you really prepare enough for a zombie apocalypse? I mean, you can. You can dig a ditch and fill it with fire. I read the Zombie Survival Guide when I was a teenager. A lot. But that's sort of more of like an allegorical threat. It's that they're just people, but they never tire, they never sleep, and they never stop coming. And it's like that slow march of death sort of feel. I don't know. Fast zombies just scare me. Resident Evil started adding fast zombies. Like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
And then Left 4 Dead, nothing but fast zombies. I was like, oh, I don't like fast. And then War Z, bad movie. Don't watch it. Horrible. Not like the book at all. Read the book instead. But like that type, they're like ants.
Yeah.
They're like climbing over each other, building a pyramid of bodies to get to like one person. And like that's terrifying.
I feel that like that's a little weird. Like
I feel like that's more evolutionary though, because
Yeah.
they kept evolving.
Yeah,
they didn't necessarily die per se.
It was a disease. It didn't kill. Maybe it killed them. I don't know. If it was based off the book, it absolutely killed them. But then we're getting into the range of what constitutes death.
Yeah.
Because their brains were still technically functioning except for the frontal lobe, which is where I think, I'm not a brain surgeon. That's where the
Emotions and
the
like,
meat and potatoes of being
where
a
like
person.
behavior and things are.
Is that like...
I'm in psychology. I should know this, but
I thought...
frontal lobe. It's kind of like I'm pretty sure it's like your attitude and like behaviors and reactions.
So
to things.
it's like the person part of the brain.
Yeah,
the
your
more
personality.
animalistic part
if
is
that
the
gets
rest of it.
damaged, your personality will change.
Right, because that's how they did lobotomies with ice picks. I keep forgetting. I always forget the ice pick lobotomies. But then, how about the difference between how zombies are made? Like virus, bacteria, pathogens, parasites. What do you guys prefer in a story?
I've really been into the show Z Nation, and basically like how they interpreted zombies being made. It was like a mixture of like the world's worst diseases or like identifiable diseases. Like they would take like Ebola and like this guy who could like he was crushed or something like that, but he was still alive, but he could blink, but he couldn't move or do anything, and like they would mix like all these crazy things together and then just let it loose like on the world.
That sounds like Umbrella Corporation. What about you?
I mean, it doesn't really matter to me on how they come around. I mean, usually there's no cure anyway, so it doesn't really matter.
I mean, there's always a cure, like the cure for
I
vampirism.
think people like to think there's a cure, but it's never like in vampirism. It's not what you want it to be.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always that like macho guy with a gun. He's like, I got your cure right here, and then he shoots a zombie in the head. It's like he's cured. It's like, yeah, I guess.
I mean,
Sure.
I mean, in like like Haitian zombies, it was believed that if you fed them salt, that they would turn back to their normal selves.
That kind of makes sense. I mean, if there's a poison in your system, especially like the Haitian voodoo powder or the zombie powder, salt would definitely flush that out of you really fast when you're vomiting constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So that makes sense. How about, I mean, culturally, to kill a zombie, you have to destroy the head, right?
Yeah, destroy the brain. That's the main function.
Is there any variation?
I want to argue that there is variation because when you think about it, it's like the brain and the spinal cord are like your central nervous system. Like that's where everything is. So like when you see zombies that are like in half, I'm like, I feel like there should be something different about you because it depends, I think, on like what part in that central nervous system it is, because it's kind of like if something affects your brain, it's going to affect parts of your spine and all of these other things. Then
I think it also plays into how alive is a zombie.
mm-hmm.
Like if we're going full undead route, all those organs are pointless.
Yeah.
But then why is the brain important?
You know, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but in like The Walking Dead, they said it was like in the very like old part of the brain, like before we started evolving. So like the cerebral cortex and things like that is where like you come after you die, like that sparks up again, and that's what brings the corpse back to life and what roams around and like every basic, like a child like puts everything in their mouth. That's what a zombie is gonna do. It's eat everybody.
So what you're saying is baby boomers were right and children are zombies.
I mean, have you ever like seen a child? Sometimes their mouth is just open and they're like drooling and like reaching for things.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, you just gotta
They're not as aggressive. I mean, they don't know how
I
to
don't
walk
know about
yet.
you.
They're working on their
They're figuring it
gross
out.
and fine motor skills.
Now, I think there's another type of zombie similar to the Haitian zombie, but like somebody whose brain just gets fried by maybe a psychic force or like PSI or something like that. That's another type of zombie entirely that's completely different, like a mindless entity that isn't undead, that still has motor function. That's something completely different, though, wouldn't you argue? It's not this. It doesn't play into the same horror of an undead zombie. Like someone whose brain, if you could get your brain fried, and you're just a slave to something else, that feels different.
I think like usually with like undead, like your body really can't function as like a whole anymore. Like parts of you, like because with the zombie, like your organs are done. You don't need those anymore. Like you're not. There's all these parts of like a human being that like consist of like what's considered to be alive, and I think like having like a soul, personality, like being able to communicate with people, and then like a body that functions and like you're in control of, like mixed together kind of considers one. And like thinking that if it's just your brain that's wiped, I don't think you could still be called like a zombie, but you're not like
a zombie.
Typical. I forget what I'm talking about. Like what people really consider to be
undead, or like
the mythical, or
that sort of like monster zombie.
Mm-hmm.
I think it sort of plays into a completely different fear. Like when you're part of an undead zombie group, you're not that person anymore. There's none of that that's really retained. But instead, it's more like you're moving as a group. You're a drop in the sea of undead. But when you're like when you're a brain fried cerebral cortex zombie thing, not undead, somebody else is pulling the strings. Mm-hmm. It's none of that animalistic instinct anymore. The person's still there.
Mm-hmm. Like you have a chance to like becoming whole again. You're just not.
Or maybe not. I don't know how brains work.
I use yes, as an adult, you could still like create like neurons and things like that, and your brain can heal. But Yeah, like your brain will just learn to function without like certain other parts, like being dead or something like that. And usually, like you have to physically like remove those parts, kind of so that your brain can like function, like knowing it's not there or something like that. But I think you could come back from that. It's not like unless you're doing coke or something.
I think coke might solve the zombie problem. You're just gonna have a face hole, and then you're gonna be a re-dead from Legend of Zelda. But as far as stepping away from pop culture, zombies sort of are a generic term when you get into different cultures and different aspects. I mean, like, they're not specifically the same thing, because it's all magic, sometimes. Like, I guess a skeleton's a zombie, right? In a way. There's just no meat on them bones.
Well, does a skeleton have a brain? Like,
Well, I mean, if we're getting into the magical aspect, does it really need one? If you were doing something like necromancy, that's all magic ambulating that corpse, right?
I would think like they fall under the term of like a reanimated.
I guess that is different then, huh?
Yeah, because like I think if you consider a skeleton a zombie, then you're oversimplifying.
Zombie.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair. So reanimation falls into a different category, but there's still necromancy zombies, right? I mean, that's kind of what Haitian voodoo would claim to be.
Yeah.
They killed that person with the voodoo powder and then brought them back. But in another sense, they knocked that person into a coma and then basically melted their frontal lobe with drugs. Is a very graphic oversimplification of the process. So, we covered virus, the fast and slow. What about, and it's kind of magic, I guess. What about biological zombies? Because, I mean, we talked about cordyceps, and, like, The Last of Us is basically a running rampant cordyceps fungus infection, right? I don't know anything about The Last of Us.
it's just fungus. It's just spores that got spread out and they go into the body and they take control of it, and then you start to change.
And
So
they start fast and they get slow.
yeah, and they get bloated too.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, so they're dead though, right?
I mean, if you kill a person, then they don't change into it. You have to be alive for it to actually change you.
So it's not that it's not an undead zombie. It's more of like the mind controlled one.
Yeah.
Okay, I literally have never seen anything or played Last of Us, so it's a weird realm for me, mostly because I'm terrified of like spore clouds and stuff, and the very real terror of a zombie mushroom, because the rainforests are weird, man. There could be anything out there, and I don't want to think about it. But I mean, that the ability for a living thing to take over another living thing is a very common thing in the animal world, or in the natural world at least, not just in animals, but plants taking over other plants, insects taking over plants, that sort of thing. And I think that's kind of what makes Last of Us a little more scary.
Yeah, I mean, it has to do kind of with evolution, you know, like, we like to be at the top of the food chain, like.
Then when mushrooms start eating us, where do we fit in?
Yeah, where do we fit in? And, I mean, yeah. I have a weird question, like, if a zombie has, like, rotting organs, right? How come they want to eat? How come they need to digest if it's just going to fall out of them again?
I think that's not.
I think it's definitely not like
It's
a need
not for
fulfillment.
sustenance. Like,
It's
you're just eating. I don't think you're processing, like, the food. Like, you need it to survive. 'Cause really, they're just. I don't know what I'm trying to say. It's like.
If I remember from like if we're talking about like a very generalized thing like World War Z, the book, not the movie, and like their strain, it was called the Solomon virus or something, and it turns the human body into an aerobic system. They don't need air, they don't need food, and it's basically a machine that's built to run until it falls apart. The thing is with it, the virus, the reason they eat and try and consume things is not to fill the body, because you can see them like their stomachs will burst open, the stuff will fall out undigested, that sort of thing. But it's a mean for the virus to propagate itself. It's just a virus spreading using a function that is already built into it, sort of like a Trojan virus on a computer. It's going through a regular function in a means to self-propagate and reproduce. So it's not a biological function of the body or of a relic of the mind just trying to fulfill something. It's more or less the virus is co-opting something we have to spread itself.
Okay.
At least in a virus sense that would work, or a bacterial sense, or even the fungus, Amongus. I'm sorry. I'll leave.
That has to be our title for this.
The fungus. We didn't even talk about mushrooms that much. That was sort of an end little tidbit when we were talking about The Last of Us, but I don't think that's the topic. That's not the title.
I can't talk anymore. I'm